What if the wildest time travel tales weren't sleek, futuristic blockbusters, but odd little experiments made long before Marty McFly hit the gas? Back in Hollywood's earlier decades, filmmakers were already twisting clocks in ways that were funny, strange, and sometimes downright bizarre. Some took audiences to medieval kingdoms, others hurled them across apocalyptic futures, and hidden in these reels are surprises you probably never saw coming. Let's rewind and uncover 12 peculiar journeys through time. The Time Machine, 1960. If one movie gave time travel its cinematic blueprint, it was this one. George Pal's adaptation of H.G. Wells's The Time Machine became the gold standard for how Hollywood imagined time travel before the 80s. Released in 1960, it wasn't just another science fiction flick, it was a cultural landmark. The story follows Rod Taylor as a Victorian inventor who builds a lavish brass and leather time machine. Audiences watched in awe as he pushed forward through the centuries. London grew fell and transformed, around him captured with visual effects that dazzled for their era. Mannequins in shop windows changed clothes in second seasons, whipped by like pages flipping in a book, and humanity itself seemed to evolve before his eyes. Eventually, he lands in a distant future where two new societies dominate: the gentle Eloi on the surface and the predatory Morlocks lurking underground. What begins as wonder turns into survival. As the inventor realizes progress has not solved humanity's flaws, it has twisted them into something terrifying. The film leaned heavily into Wells's philosophical questions. What happens when human progress is hollow? What if we build technology but lose our spirit? The production also made history by winning the Academy Award for Best Special Effects. For moviegoers in 1960, the sequences of time flashing by were jaw-dropping, a visual language that would influence every film that followed. Unlike earlier comedies that played time travel for laughs, The Time Machine treated it with seriousness and scope, proving it could carry weighty themes alongside spectacle. Over the decades, it has become both a cult treasure and a textbook example of classic science fiction. Sure, some dialogue feels dated today, but the ambition remains undeniable. Without this film's bold leap into the unknown, Marty's DeLorean might never have had such a smooth road to ride on. The Time Travelers, 1964. What if a scientific experiment opened a literal window into tomorrow, and stepping through it meant you could never return? That's the thrilling hook of The Time Travelers, a cult gem from 1964 that turned low-budget limitations into high-concept chills. The film opens in a modest lab where a group of scientists accidentally create a screen that shows moving images of the year 2071. At first, it feels like a harmless curiosity, but curiosity quickly turns reckless. When the team steps through, they find themselves not just looking at the future, but trapped inside it. What greets them is not a gleaming utopia, but a dying Earth. Survivors scrape by, while mutants roam the wastelands. The scientists, unprepared and unwilling travelers, are forced into a desperate fight to survive. The film doesn't waste time pretending everything will work out neatly. Its most memorable touch is its ending, one of the earliest examples of a cinematic time loop. Without spoiling too much, the scientists do manage to return, but in a way that suggests their lives may forever replay like a broken record. For audiences in 1964, this was unsettling. Time travel was supposed to be adventurous or educational. Here, it was a trap, a paradox with no escape. And even with the clunky makeup and modest effects, the story's ambition gave it staying power. It even inspired a television series, The Time Tunnel, proving its concept was strong enough to echo across mediums. The Time Travelers showed that you don't need flashy machines or big budgets to unsettle viewers. Sometimes, all it takes is a portal, a misstep, and the chilling realization that time itself may be the prison. Slaughterhouse 5, 1972. What if your life played out like scrambled channels with no order and no control? That's the unsettling premise of Slaughterhouse 5, the 1972 adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's famous novel. Unlike other films, this one doesn't give time travel rules, machines, or logic. It throws you into a dreamlike mess that feels all too human. The story follows Billy Pilgrim, a man who has become unstuck in time. One moment, he's a young soldier trapped in the horrifying firebombing of Dresden during World War II. In the next, he's a middle-aged optometrist living a quiet suburban life. Then, without warning, he's whisked away to a distant alien planet where time itself is seen differently. The narrative drifts back and forth with no warning, echoing the way trauma and memory often work in real life. For Billy, time isn't a straight line. It's a jumbled loop of pain, joy, confusion, and inevitability. Watching the film feels like drifting through a fractured consciousness where past and future constantly collide. For audiences in the early 70s, this was unlike anything they had seen. It wasn't about thrills or spectacle. It was about exploring the weight of memory and the sense of fate we all feel at times. The visuals reflected this too, shifting between war suburban life and surreal alien encounters with a fluidity that kept viewers off balance. While it wasn't a blockbuster, the movie developed a reputation for being one of the most faithful attempts at capturing Vonnegut's eccentric storytelling. It dared to show time travel not as an adventure, but as a burden of fractured existence, where you're never fully free of your past. Slaughterhouse 5 reminded audiences that the scariest time travel isn't to another century. Sometimes it's being trapped inside your own memories, powerless to stop them from replaying. Time After Time, 1979. What happens when H.G. Wells chases Jack the Ripper into modern-day San Francisco? That isn't a punchline. It's the wild premise of Time After Time, a cult favorite from 1979 that blends thriller, romance, and science fiction in one package. The film begins in Victorian London, where Wells unveils his time machine to a group of friends. What he doesn't realize is that one of them is secretly Jack the Ripper. When the police close in, the killer hijacks the machine and vanishes into the future. Horrified, Wells decides he must follow, leading him straight into the chaos of 1970s America. The culture clash is half the fun. Wells, a prim and idealistic intellectual, is completely baffled by modern life. Fast food, women's independence, and the speed of urban life leave him dazed. But while the comedy of his confusion gives the movie charm, the darker suspense comes from David Warner's chilling take on the Ripper, now loose in a city already struggling with crime. Adding to the mix is a surprisingly tender romance. Wells falls for a bank employee played by Mary Steenburgen, who helps him navigate the modern world while facing the danger that lurks in the shadows. This blend of tones, comedy, horror, and love story makes the film stand out. Critics praised it for originality, and it even influenced later works that combined romance with time travel, like Somewhere in Time. For a film that could have easily been dismissed as a gimmick, it holds up as one of the smartest oddities of its era. Time After Time proved that time travel could fuel not just spectacle, but suspense, laughs, and even a love story all in the same reel. The Final Countdown, 1980. A modern warship versus history's deadliest day. That's the gripping hook of The Final Countdown, a 1980 thriller that drops the nuclear-powered USS Nimitz into December 6, 1941, the eve of Pearl Harbor. The film stars Kirk Douglas and Martin Sheen, anchoring a story that mixes military realism with time-bending speculation. One moment the crew is running drills on the open sea. The next, a mysterious storm propels the massive carrier back 4 decades. The sailors quickly realize where and, more importantly, when they are. With fighter jets, radar, and 21st century weaponry at their disposal, they could rewrite history. The tension comes from the moral question: should they? If they stop the attack, they could save thousands of lives. But interfering might also unravel history itself. The script plays this conflict straight, never winking at the audience, and that seriousness is what gives the movie its punch. The production also leaned into authenticity. The Navy provided real ships and aircraft, giving the film a scope and polish few sci-fi stories of the era could match. Watching modern F-14 Tomcats dogfight with vintage Japanese planes remains one of the most striking images of time travel cinema. While some critics found the pacing slow, the sheer audacity of the premise gave it lasting cult appeal. History buffs especially have kept the movie alive in discussion since it raises questions about fate, responsibility, and the cost of knowledge. The Final Countdown showed that time travel didn't have to be flashy. Sometimes the biggest drama is deciding whether to act when the future already knows the outcome. Somewhere in Time, 1980. Can love itself break the laws of time? That's the romantic heartbeat of Somewhere in Time, a hauntingly beautiful film released in 1980. Instead of machines or scientific experiments, this story uses sheer willpower and longing as the key to travel across decades. Christopher Reeve stars as Richard Collier, a playwright who becomes obsessed with a portrait of a woman from 1912. The woman is Elise McKenna, a stage actress whose beauty and mystery capture his imagination completely. Determined to meet her, Richard uses self-hypnosis to convince his mind and body that he belongs in her era. Against all logic, it works. He awakens in 1912, where the two fall deeply, hopelessly in love. Unlike most time travel tales, this isn't about saving the world or battling villains. It's about the fragility of connection and the ache of nostalgia. The movie leans into sweeping romance, heightened by John Barry's lush score, which remains one of its most celebrated elements. Every frame feels drenched in longing, with Reeve giving one of his most tender performances, far removed from his heroic cape. Jane Seymour as Elise radiates elegance, making their love story feel timeless. When it premiered, critics were mixed and audiences largely stayed away. It wasn't a box office success, but over time it found a passionate cult following. Fans embraced it not for spectacle, but for its emotional power, the belief that true love could reach across the decades if you only wanted it badly enough. Today, it stands as one of the most unusual time travel films ever made, reminding us that bending time isn't always about paradoxes or science. Sometimes it's about memory loss and the dream of holding on to one perfect moment. Somewhere in Time turned time travel into pure romance, proving that the strongest force against the clock isn't a machine, it's the human heart. Timerider, The Adventure of Lyle Swan, 1982. A motocross racer in the Wild West. Yes, that really happened, at least on screen. Timerider, The Adventure of Lyle Swan, released in 1980. 2 is one of the strangest mashups of sci-fi and Western ever attempted, and that's exactly what makes it unforgettable. Fred Ward stars as Lyle Swan, a dirt bike racer competing in an off-road desert race. Everything seems normal until he unknowingly drives through a secret government experiment in the middle of the course. Instead of crossing a finish line, he crosses a time warp and finds himself stranded in the late 1800s. The sight of a modern motocross bike roaring across dusty plains is bizarre enough, but to the gunslinging locals, Swan looks like some sort of supernatural force. Some think he's a demon, others think he's a miracle, but most simply want to claim his strange machine for themselves. Cue a series of shootout standoffs and chase scenes where horses try to outrun a dirt bike. What sets the film apart is how unapologetically goofy it is. Where other time travel stories worried about paradoxes, Timerider leans into the absurdity of its setup. The culture clash isn't just between centuries, it's between movie genres. One moment it feels like a Saturday matinee western, the next, it's pure pulp science fiction. It was never a mainstream success, but it quickly carved out cult status. Fans embraced its mix of campy humor, fish-out-of-water antics, and unexpectedly clever moments about how badly technology fits when dropped into the wrong century. Watching Fred Ward ride his bike in circles around stunned cowboys is the kind of imagery that sticks with you. Timerider might be messy, but it perfectly captures the oddball spirit of pre-Back to the Future time travel. Sometimes, the strangest detours are the ones you remember most. Journey to the Center of Time, 1967. Forget stepping into a machine. What if your entire lab got hurled through time like an out-of-control elevator? That's the wild premise behind Journey to the Center of Time, a film from 1967 that's equal parts pulp adventure and fever dream. The story starts with a group of scientists tinkering with advanced technology. But when their experiment overloads, instead of blowing up the whole facility, walls, desks, and blinking control panels included, becomes unstuck in time. Suddenly, the lab itself is the time machine tumbling through the ages with no brakes. One moment they're dodging dinosaurs in the prehistoric era, the next they're stranded in a sterile future where humanity looks unrecognizable. The movie unfolds like a series of bizarre episodes, each stop in time bringing new dangers and mysteries. Unlike the smooth ride of later films, this feels chaotic, unpredictable, and often downright strange. Of course, the budget shows. Many of the dinosaur shots were clearly lifted from older stock footage, and the futuristic costumes wouldn't convince anyone. Yet the very clumsiness gives the film its oddball charm. You can sense the filmmaker's ambition trying to capture the sweep of time on a tiny budget, and that scrappy determination is strangely infectious. The ending seals its reputation as a cult curio. Instead of resolving neatly, it veers into a darker, more cryptic finale. Like many 60s sci-fi films, it hints that meddling with time always carries a cost, even if you can't quite explain what that cost is. Journey to the Center of Time might not win awards for polish, but it deserves credit for swinging big. It turned one cheap set into a roller coaster ride through history, proving that sometimes ambition matters more than perfection. Planet of the Apes, 1968. Sometimes the most shocking time travel twist hides in plain sight. On the surface, Planet of the Apes looked like a straightforward sci-fi adventure. Astronauts crash land on a strange planet where apes walk, talk, and rule, while humans are mute and enslaved. But audiences in 1968 had no idea they were in for one of cinema's most devastating reveals. Charlton Heston's character George Taylor believes he's stranded on some alien world. He's caught in bizarre debates about evolution, justice, and freedom, all while trying to survive in a society that flips human dominance upside down. For most of the film time, travel seems irrelevant. There's no machine, no explanation, no paradoxes, just survival on an alien-looking planet. Then comes the finale. Taylor escapes only to stumble upon the half-buried Statue of Liberty. In that instant, the entire film reconfigures itself. He hadn't traveled to another planet at all. He'd leapt into Earth's far future, where humanity had destroyed itself, and apes inherited the ruins. For audiences living through the height of nuclear anxiety, that final image hit like a thunderclap. It wasn't just a plot twist, it was a chilling warning. Humanity wasn't guaranteed a bright tomorrow. It could just as easily burn itself out and leave the world to others. The ending has since become one of the most iconic reveals in film history, endlessly parodied and referenced. But at the time, it left moviegoers shaken, forcing them to walk out of theaters asking hard questions. Planet of the Apes proved you don't need gadgets or glowing portals to pull off a powerful time travel story. Sometimes the scariest leap through time is simply waking up to a nightmare that your own species created. Idaho Transfer, 1973. What if time travel wasn't glamorous at all, but a bleak survival experiment gone horribly wrong? That's the chilling premise of Idaho Transfer, a low-budget cult film from 1973 produced by Peter Fonda. Instead of focusing on flashy machines or grand adventures, it imagines time travel as a slow, haunting slide into extinction. The film follows a group of young people recruited by scientists who discover a way to transport humans into the future. The catch? Only those under a certain age can survive the process, which immediately makes the project feel unsettling. When they finally arrive, what greets them isn't wonder, it's a desolate wasteland. Humanity has collapsed, and the Earth is practically empty. What makes the movie eerie isn't just its subject matter, but its tone. Shot in barren landscapes of rural Idaho, the film feels lonely and stripped down, as if the budget limitations accidentally added to its sense of doom. Long silences, minimal dialogue, and bleak cinematography give it the air of a slow-moving nightmare rather than an exciting adventure. For audiences of the 70s, it was an unusual take. Most time travel stories leaned towards spectacle or paradoxes. Idaho Transfer leaned into despair. It suggested that even if we could jump across centuries, there might be nothing left worth finding. The final moments deliver a gut punch that critics at the time didn't know what to do with, but cult fans later embraced as bold and unforgettable. The movie was barely released and quickly faded into obscurity, but its survival on video and digital platforms has given it a second life. For anyone exploring oddball time travel cinema, it's a haunting reminder that sometimes the strangest stories aren't about breaking the rules of physics, but about facing a future that feels all too possible. Idaho Transfer stripped time travel of its glamour, proving that stepping into tomorrow might not bring excitement. It might just reveal the emptiness we leave behind. A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, 1949. Imagine Bing Crosby with a guitar suddenly dropped into medieval England. That's exactly the charm of A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, a musical twist on Mark Twain's novel that feels more like a vaudeville act than a serious fantasy. Hollywood in the late 40s was experimenting with genre mashups, and here they fused time travel with Castle's Knights and Crosby's easygoing humor. The story begins with Hank Martin, a mechanic from modern America who, after an accident, wakes up in the world of King Arthur. Instead of panicking, Hank pulls off tricks that make him look like a sorcerer. He predicts an eclipse, introduces gadgets centuries too early, and wins over locals with his quick wit. Oh, and he sings, that's right. Between jousts and royal feasts, Crosby breaks into song, turning the tale into part fantasy, part musical revue. What makes it fascinating is how lighthearted it is. Time travel here isn't about saving humanity or confronting paradoxes. It's about watching a wisecracking American outwit medieval traditions. The film serves almost like a cultural time capsule showing post-war optimism wrapped in comedy and melody. While some effects feel quaint today, the idea of mixing pop culture with historical legend was daring for its time. Audiences of the 40s loved seeing Crosby clash with knights and kings, even if purists raised eyebrows at the silliness. Modern viewers may laugh at the cornball humor, but there's no denying it set the stage for later films that proved time travel could bend genres. This wasn't about science or danger. It was about fun. In its own quirky way, it paved a path for the oddball spirit of later classics. Before slick machines and glowing portals, Hollywood's time travel could be as simple as Bing Crosby singing in Camelot. Strange, yes, but unforgettable. Beyond the Time Barrier, 1960. A jet test pilot flies into the future and finds a world on the brink of collapse. That's the eerie setup for Beyond the Time Barrier, a Cold War-era oddity released the very same year as The Time Machine. But where George Pal's film dazzled with spectacle, this one tapped into raw fear, using pulp science fiction to reflect the anxieties keeping audiences awake at night. The story kicks off with Major William Allison, a pilot pushing an experimental jet past the speed of sound. Instead of breaking records, he breaks reality. When he lands, it's no longer 1960, it's the year 2024. And what he finds is bleak. A cosmic plague has devastated humanity. The survivors live in domed underground cities. Many are mute, sterile, and terrified of the surface. The sets were clearly built on a shoestring budget, and the costumes look more like high school play outfits than futuristic uniforms, but that wasn't the point. The movie's power came from its allegory. In an age of nuclear tests and space race tensions, audiences recognized the warning. Humanity's own technology might be the thing that destroys it. The silent, sterile survivors represented a chilling glimpse of what might come if science was mishandled. Critics at the time weren't kind, dismissing it as a cheap imitation of bigger pictures. Yet cult fans have kept it alive precisely because of its nerve. It dared to deliver a bleak vision at a time when optimism was the safer bet. Watching it now, the clunky sets almost add to its atmosphere, as if the future itself is falling apart at the seams. Slick visuals weren't necessary to make a point. Sometimes a jet vanishing into tomorrow was enough to remind people just how fragile their present really was. So there you have it, 12 bizarre journeys through time that paved the way long before Marty revved up the DeLorean. From Bing Crosby crooning in Camelot to a motocross racer outpacing cowboys. These films proved that imagination didn't wait for blockbuster budgets. Which one surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe for more cinematic deep dives, and share this with someone who loves oddball history. After all, time travel is never just about the destination, it's about the ride.